You're listening to The Hard Truth with John Deaton. John Deaton is a Marine veteran, lawyer, and best-selling author who stared down poverty, survived street violence, and beat cancer to fight another day. From the streets to the courtroom, Deaton has taken on corporate greed and fought against government fraud and overreach. Always for the little guy, a proud father of 3 girls, Deaton brings you the raw, unfiltered truth that hits hard and holds nothing back. Join us as we dive into his journey, his vision, and what he hopes to bring to the people of Massachusetts.
Don't touch that dial or change the channel because it's Sunday at 7 p.m. and you're listening to iHeart's WRKO. This is The Hard Truth, and I am John Deaton. I hope everyone had a good week. God, I got to tell you, there's so much news every week to go over. Sometimes I just don't even know where to start. But unfortunately, I'm going to start with something that is a problem in this country. And it's I believe, reached an epidemic. And that is the fact that our judges across the country have become so soft on crime. They have been letting out career criminals on $500 cash bail, sometimes no bail. But and I'm not talking about isolated cases. I'm not talking about, there's this one instance where this was unforeseeable. We're talking about people who have been career criminals for years, 39 arrests, 14 arrests. A couple of weeks ago on the show, we unfortunately talked about that poor girl who was only 22 years old, the Ukrainian refugee who was on a public transportation, and the individual behind her who had been arrested 14 times, who was allowed to walk the streets on a promise, on a verbal promise that he would come back to court by some magistrate who wasn't even a lawyer, who wasn't even a judge. And that 22-year-old lost her life because that individual, that career criminal, that piece of you-know-what, took out a knife and stabbed her in her neck, taking her life from her. The immediate question is why? Why is that person out on the street? And some of you thinking and listening to this tonight, you think, well, that was North Carolina, and there was another incident, South Carolina. It happens here in Massachusetts. I mean, remember the illegal who was charged with rape of a child and was given $500 cash bail by a judge. Listen, I'm a former federal prosecutor, and I have never lived in an era when someone is charged with rape of a child. Normally, you wouldn't even give bail. The person has already demonstrated that they are a sick person who would attack a child. You wouldn't get bail, certainly wouldn't get $500. And this person was out on the street and commits another crime, another child. All because of weak judges who have become soft. I think this from the era of defund the police, and we gotta just somehow lose our whole law and order perspective. That somehow that if we're softer on these criminals, that they'll somehow, see the light. No, there are people who commit violent crimes and they deserve to be locked up for a very long time, if not forever, depending on the nature of the charges. And we're seeing this play out over and over. A lot of times it's related to people who are here illegally. We've seen it in Massachusetts. There was 750 arrests of criminals by ICE. Okay? And so we know it's a problem, but we need to start holding judges accountable for their entire lack of judgment when they release a career criminal out on the street. So we're going to start by listening to a father. And I got to tell you, when I watched this man testify, I got emotional. I'm getting emotional right now because you can hear the pain knowing that his daughter was calling for daddy. Like, the daughter wants dad to come rescue her from this criminal. But I'm going to let him tell the story because he can tell it so much more effective than I. This is him testifying in Congress. Okay? It's about 4 minutes, but it's worth listening to because he says it the only way a dad of a little girl could say it.
How many of y'all have kids? I'm just curious. Here's what I need you to do. When I tell you this story, think about your kids. Think about your child coming home from a night out with their friends, laying down, going to sleep, feeling somebody come in the room and wake them, and drag her out of bed, naked, forced on her knees, with her hands over her head, begging for her life, begging for her hero, her father, me, that couldn't be there. She was 5'3". She weighed 115 pounds. Bang! Dead. Gone. Why? Because Alexander Devontae Dickey, who was arrested 39 goddamn times, 25 felonies, was on the street. How about that? How good are we doing for our family? How good are you doing for your kids? He should have been in jail for over 140 years for all the crimes he committed. You know how much time he spent in prison? A little over 600 days in 10 years. He's only 30 years old. He was committing 2.65 crimes a year since he was 15 years old, but nobody could figure out that he couldn't be rehabilitated. Well, you'd have to put him in prison to see if he could be rehabilitated. Isn't that the idea of prison? But no, my daughter wanted to be a teacher. She finally figured it out 2 weeks before she was executed. And I haven't heard a damn word from Byron Gibson in South Carolina. Not one word. 4 months, no communication. His biggest concern was that he was pissed off about my interview and how I made him look on the Fox News channel with Trey Gowdy. How pathetic is that? That we're letting our 22-year-old kid visiting friends. It's all she ever wanted to do was visit friends. And she literally was executed while on her knees begging for her life. Her name's Logan Federico, not Irina. And you will not forget her. I promise you. You will be sick and tired of my face and my voice until this gets fixed. I will fight until my last breath for my daughter. You need to fight for the rest of our children, the rest of the innocents, and stop protecting the people that keep taking them from us. Please. You have the power. We put you in the power to do what you have to do. We're asking you, we're begging you all to stop this. 39 crimes in 10 years, 25 felonies. Can anybody here explain to me, well, how possibly he could be on the street? Possibly be on the street. How is it possible? I could sit down in a room and I could explain the whole process of how it failed, how South Carolina failed, Logan, okay? How lack of communication. What y'all did, you woke up a beast and you pissed off the wrong daddy. Because I'm going to put it out there, and I'm not going to be quiet until somebody helps. Logan deserves to be heard. Everyone on this panel deserves to be heard. And we will. Trust me. My daughter laid on the floor for 7 hours before somebody in that house recognized that something was wrong. And that career criminal, an hour later, went on a spending spree with her debit card. When they saw his face on a video, they didn't have to do a check. He was arrested so many times, they knew who he was. They knew exactly where to go get him. Pathetic. Absolutely pathetic that I'm here today. Thank you for your time.
Wow. Logan and Federico, rest in peace. But we're seeing this epidemic across the country where criminals, some of them illegal criminals who are here illegally, some of them are just career criminals, 39 arrests, 20 plus felonies in 10 years. In 10 years. Again, we've got to start holding judges responsible. Now, how we do that, that's an interesting thing. I don't have the answer to all of this. All I know is that judges who have lifetime tenure, they have that kind of safety net. Sometimes they just don't care because they don't think there's any consequences to them. But a young woman lost her life in a case where no reasonable person could say that he deserved to be on the street in any way. Something's got to change. We got to get back to law and order so that our streets are safe for our people. You listen to The Hard Truth. I'm John Deaton. Come back from the break. Welcome back to The Hard Truth. I'm John Deaton. You can reach the show at john@hardtruthshow.com. john@hardtruthshow.com. Send me your comments, criticisms, and maybe I'll read them on the air. So another big event that happened this week, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, or as it's now known in the Trump administration, the Secretary of War, basically convened over 800 generals and admirals from across the world where they were stationed to come to Quantico, Marine Corps base in Quantico, Virginia, because he and President Trump had some comments to make. Now, a lot of people speculated about this event. A lot of people thought that it meant that we're going to war. A lot of people said it would be a strike on Venezuelan and the cartels. A lot of people thought this, a lot of people thought that. And really what it ended up being is that the administration, through Pete Hegseth, basically issued a war on wokeness and wanted face-to-face to tell these generals and these admirals how the military and the Department of War, Defense is going to move forward, that we're getting away from habits of the past. And so instead of me summarizing everything, let's hear a clip from the Defense Secretary himself and let you hear it directly by him.
The era of politically correct, overly sensitive, don't hurt anyone's feelings leadership ends right now. But if the words I'm speaking today are making your heart sink, then you should do the honorable thing and resign. We would thank you for your service. For too long, we've promoted too many uniformed leaders for the wrong reasons, based on their race, based on gender quotas, based on historic so-called firsts. We've pretended that combat arms and non-combat arms are the same thing. We've weeded out so-called toxic leaders under the guise of double-blind psychology assessments, promoting risk-averse, go-along-to-get-along conformists instead. You name it, the department did it. Foolish and reckless political leaders set the wrong compass heading, and we lost our way. We became the woke department, but not anymore. This administration has done a great deal from day one to remove the social justice, politically correct, and toxic ideological garbage that had infected our department, to rip out the politics. No more identity months, DEI offices, dudes in dresses. No more climate change worship. No more division, distraction, or gender delusions. No more debris. But when it comes to any job that requires physical power to perform in combat, those physical standards must be high and gender neutral. If women can make it, excellent. If not, it is what it is. If that means no women qualify for some combat jobs, so be it.
Okay, now, a lot of controversy from this meeting. You just heard Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of War. I've been interviewed about this. Obviously, you all know that I'm a retired Marine officer. And I got to be honest with you. I am not offended in any way by Pete Hegseth saying no more dudes in dresses on active duty. No more beardos, right? I guess a beardo is these, long beards that people are growing today. He says we're going to look professional. We're going to look fit. Nothing controversial about that. I think that we have lowered our standards. I got to tell you, when I was in the Marine Corps on active duty, you got a physical fitness test twice a year, and you got scored. And there were scores, right? Class A, Class B, or Class 1. And there were minimum things that you had to do. You had to do a certain amount of sit-ups, a certain amount of pull-ups. You had to run 3 miles in a certain period of time. You had to be able to execute a fireman's carry. What that is if you're in combat and a fellow Marine gets injured, gets shot, and that Marine weighs, 190 pounds, you have to be able to put that Marine on your shoulder and carry him or her 100 yards somewhere to safety. If you can't execute that type of exercise, then you're not fit for that combat-related role, close combat infantry position. Now, nothing wrong with that. We had to do that. I was a lawyer in the Marine Corps. I had to pass all those tests, even though I was a lawyer, because every Marine, especially Marine officer, was expected to be able to meet minimum standards. And so I got no problem with them saying, hey, it looks bad when you go out and you look at a formation and you see a bunch of fat soldiers or fat Marines or fat sailors. That looks terrible. If you're in the Pentagon and you see generals walking around and they're clearly fat and out of shape and can't do one pull-up, it's really not a good look for the greatest fighting force in the world. So everything that Pete Hegseth said, no issue with it. Listen, we have women pilots that are combat pilots, some of the best in the world. And there are women who will not meet certain physical standards, but there's a lot of men that won't meet those certain minimum standards. And so I remember as I was leaving the Marine Corps, I remember hearing that the Air Force had implemented stress cards in boot camp, that if a drill instructor was being really harsh on an airman or an airman recruit, that they had a little card, and if they pulled out this little blue card, then that meant basically a timeout, and the drill instructor would leave that airman alone. And I called my brother up, Toby, who had a career in the Air Force, and I said, what the hell is going on, man? What's going on? You got stress cards? I mean, are you going to pull that out in a combat situation with the enemy and be like, hold on, I got to take a timeout? No, and so, of course, we need those minimums. That's good. Now, if you're going to criticize the Pete Hegseth scenario, you certainly could say, well, was it necessary to bring all of them to to Washington to spend all that money? Couldn't you have done this in a video message that sent vis-a-vis email? Sure, you could do that. I think that, one, there's a little bit of grandstanding by Pete Hegseth. Like, he was in his element. He referred to himself as the secretary, if he can engage in hard PT, then our soldiers, sailors, and Marines can do it. But I think it was more of wanting to say face to face, if you don't like what we're saying, then get out now. If you're not going to agree with us going back to a certain minimum level of physical standards, then leave now. When I was on active duty, you had strict height weight tables. If you're 6'1" like me, then you could weigh up to 205 pounds. If you weighed more than 205 pounds, then you got a body fat test. And if you were, 12% body fat, you're good to go. Okay, so, but if you're not, then you needed a waiver. How did you look in your uniform? If you're, the Marine uniform is form-fitting. If you have a gut hanging over your uniform, your belt, it looks terrible. Grooming standards. I wear a goatee today. When I was on active duty, I could never wear this goatee. Nothing wrong with that. And we have an all-military force. It's volunteer is what I'm getting at. It's an all-volunteer force. We want our young men and women to be one of the few, one of the proud. We want them to be considered exceptional. We want them to know that, hey, regular people, they're not going to be able to drill like this. They're not going to be able to have combat conditioning courses like this. They're not going to be able to PT the way you do. They're not going to be able to manipulate their own body weight the way you do, how you can, engage in this physical activity, how you can do this and do that. You're exceptional. Regular people out there in the civilian world, they wouldn't do this. They're not committed like you. Look how professional you look in your uniform, how fit you look. That's pride. And you want people to come in and be like, yeah, I want to be part of that. And so I think you're going to see recruitment continue to increase. It was down. The days of wokeness and trans gender in the military and officers wearing dresses, even though they're a biological male, they're just not going to tolerate that moving forward. And, I support that. If that makes me, old school or controversial, then that's what it does. But nothing wrong with making sure that our armed forces is the fittest, the strongest, and the meanest. Because you've got to remember, why do we have a military? It's not just to defend in case there's an attack. Is that you have to close in and destroy the enemy if we get engaged in a war. Close in and destroy the enemy. And you have to be prepared to do that. It starts from the top with the generals, with the admirals, and that's why it's there. And that's why I think they did this live. You're listening to The Hard Truth. I'm John Deaton. When we come back, exciting news in mass politics. The Hard Truth is paid for by the Deaton Law Firm. I've been representing mesothelioma and lung cancer victims for 23 years across the Commonwealth. If you or a loved one have been diagnosed with mesothelioma or lung cancer and were exposed to asbestos, you contact me at the Deaton Law Firm. That's DeatonLawFirm.com. You can also reach me here at this show at thehardtruthshow.com. That's John at hardtruthshow.com. John at hardtruthshow.com. Welcome back to The Hard Truth. I'm John Deaton. You can reach the show at John at hardtruthshow.com. John at hardtruthshow.com. All right, so in the last couple days, we've had a third entrance into the Republican primary for governor here in Massachusetts. If you've been listening to the show, you know that I had Brian Shortsleeve as a guest. We interviewed Brian. I'm sure I'll interview Brian again. At some point, I interviewed Mike Keneally. I'm sure I'll invite Mike Keneally back again to interview him as well, to check in with both of them. But there's been a third entrance, and there's a third gentleman. His name's Mike Mignogue, and he, too, is running for governor. And let me say at the outset, as I told you, and we're going to invite Mike Mignogue to the Hard Truth, give him an opportunity, get you an opportunity to listen to him, what his vision is for Massachusetts as governor. And just like I did with the other candidates talking about their campaign, I'm going to let Mike Mignogue introduce himself through his announcement video, and then I'll make a few words, and then hopefully we'll interview him real soon here on The Hard Truth. But this is the introduction of the third person to announce for governor in the Republican primary, Mike Mignogue.
I was 12 years old when the gas crisis hit. Stations like this had cars lined up for blocks, families waiting, hoping not to run out. So my mom made the coffee, I loaded up my red wagon and sold it car to car. It taught me when there's a problem or opportunity, step up. I saw that in my dad, who served in the Air Force, and my grandfather, who served as a police officer. Watching them, I learned what it means to put on the uniform and serve something bigger than yourself. So I went to West Point and joined the Army as an infantry platoon leader and ranger in Desert Storm. Leading soldiers in combat taught me true leadership requires service and grit. That carried me home to Massachusetts, where I became the CEO of Abumet for 19 years, a public company that built the world's smallest heart pumps. We saved hundreds of thousands of lives, created thousands of jobs, and when Washington tried to crush our industry with a medical device tax, we fought back and won. Whether it's leading soldiers or leading a business, the mission is the same. Take care of your people and deliver results. I love Massachusetts. It's our home. Renee and I raised our 5 kids here, built our lives here, and poured our hearts into this community. From coaching on the sidelines to supporting schools and veterans, this state has given us so much.
And we've always believed in giving back.
But too many families don't feel that promise anymore. They're being squeezed by higher costs, ignored by politicians who care more about themselves than the citizens they serve. Working people have been left behind, and many are leaving. Our current one-party system isn't working. What we need is a new kind of public servant. I'm Mike Minogue. I've spent my life running towards problems and fixing them to make a big difference. From that red wagon to soldier to CEO and dad. I'm running to be a new kind of governor, one with the faith, the heart, and the grit to serve for Massachusetts.
All right, so that was Mike Mignogue's announcement, running for governor to first win the Republican primary and then take on Maura Healey. Again, I will, as I've highlighted the other 2 gentlemen, Brian Shortsleeve and Mike Keneally, highlighting Mike Mignogue, and I will extend an invitation to Mike Mignogue to come on the show, answer our questions, share his vision as to why he, in his own words, should be the next governor. I can tell you this, any one of these 3 gentlemen will be an amazing change to Maura Healey. This one-party rule that Mike Mignogue mentions in his announcement video, we've got to do something about it. We've got to get a seat at the table. It is unhealthy. Look how they just won't even comply with an audit that 72% of the voters demanded be the law, because they don't think that the voters are going to pick someone else. And so I'm excited to see 3 very qualified individuals run for governor. And I'm looking forward to first talking to Mike. I didn't bring in Brian or Mike Keneally a second time because I didn't know for sure if Mike McNogue was going to run, but there were rumors out there, so wanted to wait. Now that he's announced, we'll get him in here. Then we'll do even a second round. Who knows? Maybe we'll have a round table with everyone. The bottom line is we need new leadership at the governor's mansion. We've got to get new leadership in this state. And so I'm excited, looking forward to hearing it. Now, let's talk about other big news. The other big news, obviously, is we are now in the middle of a government shutdown. And boy, do both sides say the very opposite things. Both sides are pointing the finger at each other. Republicans blaming Democrats, Democrats blaming Republicans, both sides calling each other liars. And here at The Hard Truth, we're going to get to the truth. Now, a government shutdown is bad news, right? People are not going to get paid. Troops not going to get paid. You know, they'll get their back pay, but air traffic controllers, all kinds of people out there being held hostage because a bunch of career politicians can't do their job. And I got to tell you something. When you listen to the Democrats, if you pop in old YouTube videos or go on X and you listen to Schumer and Pelosi and all these folks, they used to always say that you got to avoid a government shutdown at all costs. And all they needed to do was pass a continuing resolution that would keep the status quo for another 3 weeks. They voted for this like Chuck Schumer did in March, but this time, one senator, and that would be Fetterman in Pennsylvania, voted for the continuing resolution. The rest of the Democrats in the Senate, including Ed Markey and Elizabeth Warren, did not. They voted basically for the shutdown. Now, the reason all comes down to health care. The Republicans are claiming that the Democrats insisted on getting Medicaid and health care to illegal aliens who are here illegally. The Democrats are calling that a lie and saying that, no, they're only fighting for health care for Americans who are going to be kicked off because of the big, beautiful bill. Now, where's the truth? Now, under federal law, because this is called The Hard Truth, so I'm going to tell you the truth. Under federal law, illegal immigrants who are here illegally are not eligible for Medicaid. Just by law, they're not. So the Democrats are saying to you that it's unlawful for illegals to get Medicaid, so Republicans, you're lying. And you're bad and you're evil because you're lying. Is that true? Are the Democrats accurate? Yes, the Democrats are accurate that that's what the law says. But it's a play on words as usual. The truth is somewhere in the middle as usual. You see, it is the federal law that an illegal immigrant here illegally does not qualify for Medicaid. However, there's a provision that allows hospitals to be reimbursed by Medicaid after they've given care to illegals who show up at the hospital on an emergency basis, right? Someone shows up on an emergency basis, you have to treat them. And so it's indirectly a way that illegals are getting the benefit of tax dollar money. But there's another twist to it. And that is Joe Biden, under his administration, basically fudged the rules and gave so many people asylum temporary status that they would have never normally been qualified for? Well, if you're here on a temporary basis where you are on asylum, then you're technically not here illegally because you're seeking asylum and you've been placed in this temporary basis by the Biden administration, so you could qualify. But the reality is you shouldn't be here because the asylum seeking is kind of a farce. It's really not accurate. The Biden administration just gave this blanket kind of asylum claim to people for any reason. So technically, the Democrats are being like, look, this is what the law says. But the reality is that some of the health care would go to people who are here, who are non-citizens, but they're here temporarily on some legal status of asylum, and therefore that doesn't count, the Democrats say. But the reality is the Democrats are playing to their base. I'll explain it when we get back. As usual, an extreme contingency of the Democratic Party is taking hold, and they're playing to that far left basis. You listen to The Hard Truth. Welcome back to The Hard Truth. I'm John Deaton. You can reach me at john@hardtruthshow.com. Also follow me on X, John E. Deaton and the number 1, John E. Deaton and the number 1 on X. We were talking about the government shutdown. We were talking about, before the break, how everybody's playing a play on words. The reality is the government's been shut down. I don't see where there's going to be any compromise, because this is the reality. Whether you like Donald Trump, hate Donald Trump, it's fair to say that Trump has owned the Democrats. And I think the Democrats, because their base is screaming to them, do something to stop Trump, do something to stop Trump. And so they're trying to be seen as fighters. We're going to fight Trump. And so if he doesn't basically get caved into their demands, they're going to shut the government down. I think the Democrats overplayed their hand, and I think they made a big mistake. I listened to Hakeem Jeffries, and he said that he believes that public sentiment will turn on President Trump. But I think President Trump is going to take advantage of this situation and implement things that he and people in his administration want to do. The United States government has been the biggest employer in America. The average salary in the United States for a private sector worker is about $65,000. The average federal wages salary for a federal employee is twice that. It's about $120,000. So when the government jobs are the highest growing industry for job growth, and it's outpacing the private sector by leaps and bounds, you got a problem. Because it costs $7 trillion to run our government each year. But we're only getting $5 trillion in tax revenue. So we're a $2 trillion deficit every year. Hence, we have a $37 trillion national deficit. We are paying over $1 trillion in interest. And so Trump wants to lean out the federal government. And normally in a lockdown, you furlough folks temporarily. You basically lay people off. I think Trump is going to permanently fire as many as 750,000 to 1 million federal jobs. Like, just flat out, you're done. You're out of here. I think it's going to be IRS, Department of Education, FBI, Department of Energy. All of these federal agencies, I believe, are going to get leaner, especially the IRS. And so I think Trump, personally, I think he's welcoming this. And the Democrats are betting that public sentiment will turn on Trump because he is the president and the Republicans are in control of the presidency, the House, and the Senate. So therefore, they're going to turn. But Trump's not running again. See, contrary to what the Democrats think, Trump, he has fun with them with his 2028 hats, and he loves needling them and poking them by acting like he's going to run again. But the reality is, unlike his first term, where he immediately wants to be reelected, he doesn't care. Plus, he's 80 years old. So he's in his element. I don't think he cares one bit. And I think he's proven it to the Democrats. I mean, he's like the troller in chief. Very controversial. He put out a AI video of Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. And Hakeem Jeffries, he puts a mustache on him and a sombrero hat. And then it's Trump being a mariachi band, and they're saying things out of their mouth from an AI video that's not true what they said, but saying how the Democrats suck and how no one likes them and all of that stuff. And he's just having fun and he's laughing, and they're banking on that he's going to just cave in. And I don't see that happening. And so I think we could be looking at certainly more than the last one. The last time under Trump's first administration, government shut down for about 35 days. I could see this going 2 months. The holidays are coming up, and the question is public sentiment really going to turn on Trump? It could. They're the party in power. That's what the Democrats are banking on. But, every time they've banked on something related to Trump, it hasn't worked out. They banked on the lawfare. They banked on, they would call him a rapist and a racist and a xenophobe and all of these things, and it all backfired. And he got the popular vote, and blacks voted for him at a higher rate than ever before. Latinos voted for him at a higher rate before. So it's almost like their strategies always backfire. And I think that they should have taken a different approach. I really do. But I think they succumb to the far left demanding that somehow they do something. What they should have done is just be working to get back the House or the Senate for the midterms and understand that you're really playing into President Trump's hand if you keep continuing down this road. And so very dangerous. I mean, it's not a good situation. The government needs to be funded. We need to be operating, but we're going to see. This is going to be very interesting how it plays out. I don't pretend to know. I just think it's a very high risk that the Democrats are doing. Now, maybe I'll eat my words. Maybe Hakeem Jeffries is correct. Maybe if this they hold out for 2 months, 3 months, there'll be so much outrage that Trump will cave in. But again, I don't see him sitting there worrying about being reelected, and he gets to make these permanent changes, lean out the government. I think the Democrats could rule the day they do this. Okay, moving on to some other big events happening in the world today. Memphis, the governor of Tennessee, has asked President Trump to send troops to Memphis. Now, this is, of course, before the lockdown. And Trump agreed. And so troops are going to go to Memphis, which has a high murder rate, high crime rate, to see if it can have the same impact that D.C. did. Now, I want to make it clear in that scenario, the governor asked for help, and President Trump agreed. And if you remember, a month ago, President Trump encouraged all the Democrat mayors or Democrat governors of the major cities that if you have a crime problem, call me and I'll help you. That's the right way to do it. Under our law, Trump can send troops to D.C. because it's federalized. But if you're going to go into a state, let's take Massachusetts, whether you guys like it or not, Maura Healey is the governor, and she is the commander-in-chief of the National Guard here in Massachusetts. That's just the way it is. And the president, if he's going to federalize the National Guard and send them into Massachusetts or send them into Chicago, you can't do it under the law in our Constitution unless you work with the governors. Or there is a real emergency, a real exigency. And the only thing I could think of Trump doing, because he's talking about going to Chicago, and we know the governor of Illinois doesn't want it. And we know there's going to be litigation. If there's litigation, I predict that the Democrats would win because the law is pretty clear. I think Trump was going to have to rely on the Insurrection Act. He's going to have to rely on that. Here are some gang activity in Chicago, and that gang activity constitutes an invasion from the cartel, and that he's therefore going in there to stop that invasion of cartel members who are poisoning American citizens. Now, when I say it like that, it may sound like that's a plausible thing to do, but the reality is, first of all, Chicago's so big, it would be so expensive. It isn't D.C., it's not centralized. It's not Memphis. Memphis is very centralized. Going into a massive city like Chicago will be tens of millions of dollars, and ultimately, I think Trump would lose legally because you got to go through the governors. It's the 10th Amendment. You know, there is this federalism, states' rights, all of those things come into play. So, so far, Trump's doing it the right way. He's relying on a governor of Tennessee to ask for a request, and then he does it. So we'll see. Lots of other things going on. Comey got indicted. James Comey, the former FBI director, for lying to Congress and obstruction of a congressional hearing. A lot of controversy there. Remember, this is Comey who did leak information, 100% leaked information. He claims he did it after he was director. Trump's administration claims it's while he was director. They say they got the evidence. Comey put himself in this situation. He shouldn't have leaked at all, in my opinion. You're listening to The Hard Truth. I'm John Deaton. See you next week.
You're listening to The Hard Truth with John Deaton. John Deaton is a Marine veteran, lawyer, and best-selling author who stared down poverty, survived street violence, and beat cancer to fight another day. From the streets to the courtroom, Deaton has taken on corporate greed and fought against government fraud and overreach. Always for the little guy, a proud father of 3 girls, Deaton brings you the raw, unfiltered truth that hits hard and holds nothing back. Join us as we dive into his journey, his vision, and what he hopes to bring to the people of Massachusetts.